Michael Jordan, Lance Armstrong, Tiger Woods. Would these guys make good hunter salespeople? Stick around to find out on today's episode of This Week in Sales. Hello and welcome to This Week in Sales. I'm Kevin Gaither, the CEO and founder of Inside Sales Recruiting. You may recall our goal of the show here is to help sales professionals with tips and tactics and techniques to help them improve their performance right now. Today's guest is Dr. Christopher Croner, a principal with SalesDrive, and also the author of one of my favorite books, Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and with all of the viewers on This Week in Sales.
Great. Chris, before we get started, tell me, what's your most unusual sales interview you've ever conducted?
My most unusual? I think the one that would stand out as the most unusual, one I did a couple years back. I was in a room at a hotel airport, actually, and I was seeing several different individuals for one organization. And there was someone who came in, it was nearing the end of the day, and we're sitting there at this table, and the lights are getting dimmer, it's the end of the day, and we had this light hanging over us, this low-hanging light. And I'm asking this person question after question. We'll talk about the sorts of questions that we use later on. And it was obvious that he was getting a little bit uncomfortable kind of answering the sorts of questions that we ask, and he breaks out into a sweat at one point, and he's getting more and more nervous, more and more choked up. He runs out of water. I said, look, you want to take a break? Can I maybe get you some water? And he said, sure, that would be great. So I went and got him some water. He sits back down. He looks across the room. We were in sort of a suite. And he looks across the room and says, could I maybe sit on the couch just to relax a little bit, just to calm down a little bit? So I said, okay, sure, you can sit down. And I sat on the chair next to him, and I've got my notepad, and I'm taking notes. It brought me back to my clinical days. And he's, again, just getting more and more nervous as the interview goes on. The nice opportunity, or the nice aspect of the interview process like that, and the sorts of questions that we ask, is that it kind of ferrets out the folks that don't deal well with those high-pressure sales situations.
Right.
And that's the reason that we ask the questions we ask.
Right, wonderful. I can't even imagine. You really were making him sweat for sure.
Yeah, he said, Dr. Croner, these questions, they're really hard. You're really nice, but these questions are hard. And I said, well, yeah, that's really the point. They're supposed to be hard. The point is really to make sure that the match is right for the company and that it's right for you too. It's really kind of looking at it on both sides and making sure there's a good fit.
Good. Well, that certainly is an unusual situation. I think it would be even more unusual if we continued on without properly introducing you. So let me properly do that. Dr. Christopher Croner is a principal with SalesDrive, which is a firm that specializes in the selection and deployment of high-performing salespeople. Dr. Croner is the co-author of the book Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again, of course, detailing his research and practice in identifying the non-teachable personality traits common to top producers. And Dr. Croner developed the proprietary Drive test diagnostic system, including the Drive interview for salesperson selection. And using this system, he's helped numerous companies to hire and develop top-performing salespeople. So, Chris, what are those traits? What's the secret sauce? The traits of a top-performing hunter salesperson. Lay it on us.
The secret sauce. Yeah, we started out very research-based. We went back looking at the last 80-plus years, everything that's been published academically on this topic. There's so much agony out there, so much frustration in sales managers and in entrepreneurs hiring people that just don't have that potential, who end up letting you down, who promise the world in that interview and then don't perform when the time comes down the road. And we found, looking at everything that's been published, as well as our own work in doing behavioral interviews with sales candidates and then circling back thereafter with their sales managers to find out who becomes successful, we found many of the things that you might expect to be important are in fact important. Things like relationship skills and organizational skills and persuasiveness, for example. But beyond any of those, by far, there were three characteristics that continue to stand out and differentiate the hunters of the world. One of them is what's called the need for achievement. And the need for achievement is sort of the person who has this desire to do well simply for the sake of doing well. They want to constantly set the bar high, jump over that, and set it higher again the next time. They are the person who's always pursuing excellence for the sake of excellence. So that's the first piece. The second piece is competitiveness. And the competitive salesperson really wants to do two things. Number one, they want to be the best among their peers. And number two, they want to win the customer over to their point of view, because to them, that sale is like a contest of wills. And then the third piece is optimism. And that's the person's sense of certainty that they'll succeed, as well as their resiliency to hang in there when they face the inevitable rejection that a salesperson faces. I think of just about any job in the world, sales is the most psychologically challenging. The pure hunter sales position is the most psychologically challenging job out there. No other position really demands that a person knock on a door, get the door slammed in their face, and then knock on the next door with that much more certainty and enthusiasm. No other position really demands that type of gut check. So it's those three pieces together: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, that psychologically creates sort of the perfect storm, if you will, in the salesperson. And those are the three characteristics that collectively we refer to as drive. And those are the ones that we look for with our testing process and that we help companies to interview for as well.
So, Michael, let's answer the question. Michael Jordan, Lance Armstrong, Tiger Woods, would these people make good hunter salespeople? Or not?
Yes, we use each of those individuals in terms of exemplifying the characteristics. What's interesting is a lot of folks, when they look for a good salesperson, they look for the more teachable things oftentimes. Things like persuasiveness and relationship skills, organizational skills. Those things are all important. But what we're looking for is something a little bit more inborn, something that is relatively cemented at the age of 21, 22. There's not much we're going to do to change a person's drive. It's sort of either it's there or it's not. So we're looking at someone like, say, a Michael Jordan, for example, someone who would let nothing get in the way of his competitive desire to succeed, almost to a fault at times. Someone who is constantly focused on being the best, constantly focused on excellence. You can take someone like that who has that innate sense of certainty, who has that innate competitiveness, that innate need for achievement, and you can teach that person the aspects of sales that involve persuasion or relationship skills, etc. On the other hand, you can get someone that can sell. You can get someone that knows how to do the things that require success in sales. Someone who knows how to persuade, someone who knows how to build relationships, but does not deep down have that passion. And that person will get to a certain level of their production, and then they'll just level off. It's something that a lot of folks have a lot of frustration and confusion about. A lot of sales managers came to us early on saying, we've got this guy, I've seen him sell. I know he can do it. But all of a sudden, he's just plateauing. What's going on? Why is he just turning in the same performance quarter after quarter? Well, that's the person who's low on need for achievement. The person low on need for achievement, who say motivated by money. I get a lot of people who will say, I'm looking for somebody who's motivated by money motivation in an interview. I'll tell them no. The person motivated by money gets up to a certain level of production, and then they level off. And you're left asking, what's going on? The reason for that, again, psychologically, is because that person motivated by money eventually hits a plateau. They eventually reach the lifestyle that they were originally interested in. So what happens at that point? Now they know what they need to phone in quarter after quarter. And that's what they do. The person motivated by need for achievement continues to excel. They continue to do well. They continue to set the bar higher. Money to them is like points on the scoreboard to an athlete. It's how they show how well they've done, not their goal in and of itself. Does that make sense?
I think I've used that analogy on multiple occasions. Because the common misconception is that money is the motivating factor. Well, if we just put a good compensation plan in place, then they'll hit their goals. Well, you know what? We still see that that bell curve, and people are on either side of that equation. Yet the people that have need for achievement are the ones that are constantly reading to improve themselves. They're the A-player salesperson that says to themselves, yes, but I can be that much better. And they stay later, come in earlier, and you can see how they're actively improving themselves on a regular basis. You better believe that makes sense. So need for achievement, competitiveness, optimism.
Yes.
These things seem fairly obvious.
Mm-hmm. They would seem obvious at first, although, again, when we started out, given the frustration of people not performing well, our quest really became to differentiate, okay, what is it that separates the mediocre performers from the great performers? And I think of the two, when we look at competitiveness and optimism, those are two that people found important, that a lot of people were looking for kind of piecemeal, but it was that need for achievement that many people weren't. In fact, that's the one thing that really kind of differentiates the test that we have against everything else that's out there, is our focus on that need for achievement, especially hard. Of the three elements of drive, we found that need for achievement is the most important. It's important not only for salespeople, but it's also important for entrepreneurs, research has shown. People who need to get up every day and make it happen. There's no one watching over them. And for whatever reason, people have been looking at those things in pieces, but they haven't seen them all together. It's really a volitional model of motivation. All three pieces are essential. You can have one of those three pieces, you can have two. It won't be enough. You really need all three together. We can talk about what happens. So for example, let's say you have the person who's very high in optimism, but they're lower on the other two. That's often the person who, again, they may be a great believer. They may be the person who always feels that the sale is right around the corner. They're always promising good things, but they're not closing. At the end of the day, they don't have that same degree of passion or motivation as the individual who's also strong on need for achievement and competitiveness. On the other hand, let's look at the opposite. Let's say you have someone that's high on need for achievement. Maybe they're competitive, but they lack optimism. That's someone who's going to set great goals for themselves. They may be competitive. They may be coming from another field. They may be coming from another industry. And they may say to themselves, well, let me try sales. Let me see how I'll do. And then they fail the first time. And because they've got that low optimism, maybe they got a thinner skin, that first rejection stings. It hurts them badly, especially someone who's coming with that background strong in need for achievement, because chances are, to this point in their life, they have succeeded again and again. And when they get that door slammed in their face, again, low optimism, that's going to hurt. So you really need all three pieces together. You see how they kind of work synergistically.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, you know what? Let's go into the role play. I've got so many other questions for you that I think our
Sure.
audience there, but let's make sure that the audience takes this away. We're talking about need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism. So what we're going to do now for the audience, those playing the home game, Chris is going to ask me some questions as if he's the interviewer, and I'm going to be the interviewee. And what the audience, the goal here is that the audience is going to learn a couple of things. One, what are a couple of questions that the sales leaders out there could and should be asking their salespeople? Second, how they can then dig deeper to learn if that candidate is giving us a good answer or not. So we'll go with we'll ask a question, I'll give an answer, you'll dig down deep, and then you'll debrief the call as if you're, or debrief the interview as if you're reviewing game film. How's that sound?
My pleasure, absolutely.
Good.
Would it be okay if I maybe step back just a little bit and give a couple of tips in terms of starting out the interview process?
I'd love that.
And things to do to lead up. One of the things I want you to notice, I've got my questions typed up. It's a small point, but it's an important point. One of the things we'd like to make sure that sales managers, anyone interviewing, the HR folks, anyone interviewing a salesperson does, have your questions written out, typed up ahead of time, and leave yourself some space to write the answers. What this does is it helps you to stay on track. One of the challenges that I think a lot of folks face when they're interviewing sales candidates is these candidates, oftentimes when they've read books on how to do well in an interview, these books instruct them on how to take over the interview. So how to make sure that the questions are redirected, how to make sure that you transform everything into your time as a candidate to give your kind of spiel. And one of the things that can help you as a sales manager to stay on track is to have your questions written out ahead of time so you know what you're going to do. We're going to be going through some questions on Drive in just a second. In terms of placement of those questions in the interview process, I like to start out the interview a little bit lighter. So I'll typically go into areas like organization, things where the candidate typically expects to talk about. And you'll notice that we use what we call behavioral questions. And this is because, again, the best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior. So we want to look at patterns. We want to look at things that the person has consistently done in the past that will predict how they will perform going forward. When I start out my interview, I like to, again, kind of warm the person up, maybe 5 to 10 minutes of small talk. You're going to get people who are going to be a little bit nervous in an interview. Often when they find out they're interviewed by a psychologist, they get especially nervous. So I want to kind of calm them down. And then I like to go through the person's resume. And when I review the person's resume with them, for each of their positions, I like to ask them 3 questions. Number 1, give me a brief description of the position. what did you do? Just a brief job description. Number 2, where did you rank on the sales team? And then number 3, what got you to move on to the next position? And when you ask that question, what got you to move on to the next position, you will frequently start to notice patterns in what the person says to you. For example, you may notice the person being very politically correct. Oh, there were some misunderstandings with my supervisor relative to my compensation. Oh, there were some misunderstandings with my peers, things like that. And when I start getting those politically correct answers, what I like to do is circle back with that person and say, okay, use what I call at this point the magic wand question. If we had a magic wand and we could change 3 things about that job so you would never want to leave, what would those 3 things be? And when you ask that question, that's where you'll start to get gold, because the person will then stop and think, and they'll start to think, well, maybe my assistant wouldn't have quit. I would have gotten paid more, and I wouldn't have slugged the sales VP, something like that. Though, well, maybe not give you that something that intense, but to give you something you can dig in on, and that's what's important, is use a question like that. So I go through the person's resume, then I get into, again, some of the organization questions, maybe questions around problem solving, and then I get into Drive, and that's where we're going to go right now. So we're going to cover questions relative to each of the elements of Drive, and we're going to start with need for achievement. And one of my favorite questions relative to need for achievement, again, I kind of go off my form. This is what I'd like you to do as the interviewer as well. Tell me, Kevin, what types of sacrifices have you had to make over the years to be successful in sales?
Well, first I'd loosen up my collar because it's getting hot here. Well, I could tell you that I have had to have many conversations with my wife and my family about dinner time and bedtime with the kids and reading stories, because it almost seems like 4 out of 5 nights of the week that I am not home for dinner, and sometimes missing, helping my wife put the kids down, for bed and bath time and all that kind of stuff. And I know that plays on my wife, and certainly there's that email or call that I'll get at 6 o'clock at night from my wife saying, "Hey, when are you coming home?" And I'll say something like, "All right," something like, "Just 2 more emails to go."
So I can tell that balance is important for you, a little more along the lines of personal time.
Well, yeah, but obviously I haven't achieved that, because to this day it's still just 2 more emails to go, and then that's 2 hours later and I still haven't left the office yet. And that's not a good thing. I think I'm sacrificing there.
Yeah, so in a perfect world, again, if we had a magic wand and you could get just sort of the perfect job and spend the perfect amount of time at work, what would that perfect situation look like?
Well, the perfect situation would be one where it was the least amount of work and the most amount of money. I mean, am I being facetious by answering that way?
Oh, I don't think so at all. I really appreciate that. One of the things that we want to make sure of is that the position is the best match, not only for the company, but also for you. We want to make sure that you're happy. So I appreciate that. Now, I think we can debrief this.
Yeah, let's do that.
In terms of your reaction, again, when you ask that question, what kinds of sacrifices have you had to make to be successful? One of the things you have to ask as the sales manager, as the interviewer, to gauge the person's response, is you have to look at where have you, the manager, set the bar for that position. When you look at the people who have been successful for you, and when you look at the demands that you are going to place on that person, where is that bar at for you? The person's saying, well, you know what, I came in an extra weekend one time last year, that may raise a red flag to a lot of people, because again, what we found in terms of that work-life balance, if you will, many of the best salespeople, in fact, most of the best hunter salespeople, are sort of a little bit more along the lines of the work or the job, if you will, the business 24/7. So they're always answering emails, and it's something they enjoy. They love it. It's hard for them almost to get enough of it. It's something that they just enjoy intrinsically. One of the things that I kind of picked up on, again, in your response to me is this sort of desire, again, to spend more time at home. And there's nothing wrong with that. That can be the sort of balance that we all seek. But I wanted to get more clarification. And so what I used at that point was a technique that I mentioned. Again, you can kind of repurpose that out of the resume review and into your interview questions. Again, sort of the magic wand question. If we could create sort of the perfect scenario in a perfect world, what would that look like for you? And when I asked you that question, that's when it really kind of came clear. We kind of dug down that one layer deeper. And you said, well, I guess in a perfect world, I'd be doing the least amount of work. I'd be spending the most amount of time I could at home. And again, that's great. But what that cues me into then as an interviewer is then relative to need for achievement, that might not be your primary focus in life. Your primary goal right now might not be career advancement. So that's something that I would make note of. Of course, we always ask more than one question relative to each of the characteristics, and I would continue to ask additional questions. But I would begin to have a suspicion at that point that need for achievement may not necessarily be as high as we would like it to be if we're hiring for the classic hunter, if you will, the classic account acquisition specialist. Does that make sense?
So if I hear you correctly, Chris, the somebody who has high need for achievement would not feel like they're making sacrifices in favor of work. Did I hear you right?
Essentially, yeah. One of the responses you'll get is, I guess I'm hard pressed into times to figure out what is a sacrifice. I guess to me, if I were gone for a month or two, maybe that's a sacrifice. But to me, I enjoy what I do. I always look for the person that doesn't consider work to be a substantial sacrifice. Someone who's saying, you know what, I'm having fun with this. Like they say, if you enjoy what you're doing, you never work a day in your life.
Work is not a sacrifice.
Exactly.
Got it. Very good. All right. Good. This is good. Let's move on. Next question. I'm under the hot seat. Here we go.
You got that light dangling right above you.
Yes. Where's the couch?
So tell me, Kevin, when was the last time you were competitive at work?
Well, I don't know if this. I don't know if this counts, but you tell me. I was in a work situation, or it was a work environment, a work event after work where we went for like a happy hour, and there was a shuffleboard table, and a couple of us teamed up and played against each other, and that was just last week, and that was a classic competitive situation. But I don't know. Does that count?
Let's refocus maybe in the world of work. Let's look at, again, at work. Tell me about the last time you can remember being competitive, kind of on the job, if you will.
Right. Okay. Well, so last month was, we get our goals monthly, and there's that whiteboard and the dashboards that come out for the salespeople that are, percent to goal. And I was ranked number 2 going into the end of the month. I was, 118.2, and Jane was ahead of me, and she was at 120% to goal. And I wanted to get to number 1, and so I doubled down, made a lot more calls, and I quantified it. I quantified the calls that I needed to make to get where I needed to be, and ultimately end up beating her out just by a hair on the last day of the month. Just by a hair. That's right. It was like she was 121 and I was like 122 or something like that. It wasn't, but I beat her.
Well, when I talk to your manager after this interview, will he be able to substantiate this?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I've got my brag book if you want me to pull it out.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. I think we can debrief this one.
Great. Let's do that.
We did a couple of things. We did maybe 3 different things here. Number 1, when we asked the question, tell me about the last time you were competitive, you used an example of an after-work kind of extracurricular activity situation. And people will often bring up things like that. They'll talk about maybe the last time they were at the gym and maybe they're running around the track, and they saw somebody who was just a little bit ahead of them, so they had to run a little faster and catch up with that person. And that's fine. People often will give examples like that, but we'll always have them, of course, circle back to the world of work. Because, again, we want to look at behavior in the world of work. Something that's interesting, an interesting pattern that we found over the years in terms of competitiveness on our testing results, is sometimes you'll see an individual who's lower on need for achievement, lower on optimism, but very high on competitiveness. And when I see that particular pattern, oftentimes the first thing I'll wonder about, and this often proves true, is that the individual does some sort of extracurricular activity. Because when someone has that high degree of competitiveness but low need for achievement, low optimism, they need to get that competitiveness need met somewhere. So oftentimes it's through some sort, again, softball league, football, some sort of way of getting that taken care of outside the world of work. The person who's also high in need for achievement and competitive, that's the person who gets that competitiveness need met at work. So, that's the sort of individual that we're looking for. So I had to circle back to the world of work. Thereafter, when you talked about being just a hair above your competition. You told a pretty good story. I wanted, again, to get a little bit more clarification, and I used a technique called the echo, where all I did was repeat the last couple of words that you said, a hair above or just above the other person. And just using a gentle technique like that can elicit a lot more information, because I'm essentially saying to you, tell me more, but I'm not being in any way forceful. I'm not saying, what are you talking about? Tell me a little bit more. Instead, I'm being very gentle, just repeating a couple of words, repeating the last few words you said, which is a cue for you to give me some more information.
And you didn't guide me either. Mm-hmm. So that made it valuable, because it let me just keep on talking.
Exactly. And that's what you want to do as the interviewer. You want to give the person as much rope as you possibly can, right, to get as much information as you can. I like to call it playing Columbo. That's one of the things I was taught back on the clinical side, was when you're dealing with someone that's coming in, they're revealing a lot of personal information to you. Again, we're just focused in the world of work when we're doing interviews. But again, play Columbo. No one can ever punish you for being confused. And if you recall Detective Columbo on TV, someone who was always kind of scratching his head and coming back saying, oh, one more thing, Peter Falk. And I would advise you to take the same approach, almost a one-down approach with your interviewee. Sitting down with them and saying, I'm a little bit confused. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or just kind of, again, echoing the last few words the person said. Because again, you're there to learn about them. No one can punish you for being confused about them, because the candidate is the expert on the candidate. You are simply there as a detective to learn more. And that's the fun thing about interviewing, is you really get to dig down deep and learn about this person. Learn about what makes them tick and whether or not they're going to be a good match for you.
Good.
In terms of the third element, we use something that I think Dr. Brad Smart talks about in his book, Topgrading, which is an excellent book, the threat of reference check technique, where you solicit from the person a few individuals. It's an excellent technique. It's a great book. You solicit a few individuals whom they have worked with and who they can use as references, and then you bring up those folks during the interview process. I highly recommend that folks read Mr. Smart's book, Topgrading and Topgrading for Sales as well. Both excellent books.
I agree. I would say that the specific tactic for the sales leader who's sitting and watching this right now, it's as simple as asking that question that you just asked. Would your sales manager back that up? Yes or no? And then this is what I do. One step deeper then is simply saying, and great, and just for my records, what's their name again? What's their title? How do you spell that? And write it down, and then ask the thread of reference check. Where are they right now? And would they provide a reference for you? Those are some really important techniques right there. I found that the thread of reference check is incredibly valuable in sussing out the truth. Mm-hmm. Keep going.
Yeah. I found the same thing. It's a very powerful technique. Now, in terms of competitiveness, I think we've flushed that one out, unless you want to talk about it more. I'd be inclined to go on to optimism.
Let's do it.
All right. So, Kevin, tell me about a time when you remained persistent, even though everyone else around you gave up.
Persistent. Well, there was it was Acme Iron in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, and this was an account that nobody had penetrated ever in the history of our company. And the mantra was, "You'll never get through to Jane Doe, the CFO, because she's absolutely impossible to get through." But I developed a couple of creative ways to fax her information, try her after hours, and eventually got a hold of her and won her business. It was a $1 million equipment leasing deal. Again, everybody else gave up, and the account came to me, and of course that would seem like a dog, but I stuck to it and closed the business.
Fantastic! You've got to be proud of that.
Very.
So, how many contacts would you say it took you before you finally broke through?
I did not track these, but we're talking about a 6-month process, me keeping diligent notes in Salesforce.com when I was contacting her. I even got so specific, Chris, that I was looking at the day of the week and the hour of the day that I was calling to see when I was getting her receptionist, when I wasn't getting her receptionist. I was playing around with the phone. So how many touches? I'd say probably 28, 20, 30 touches, something like that.
30 touches. Okay.
Over
So
a 6-month period.
Over a 6-month period. And of those 30 touches, which of them would you say was most effective?
Most effective. Well, when I finally got her on the phone and I was prepared with my opener, because every call I had to be prepared to, if she picked up, what would I say and not be surprised. And what she said to me was, "You are one of the more persistent salespeople I have ever come across in my entire life. You've got 5 minutes." And that was my chance to shine, and obviously it worked out well for me.
Very good. And I would imagine, once again, that when we circle back with your manager, that we'll be able to get verification.
Oh, I was hooting and hollering. If my boss doesn't remember that one, I don't know who would.
Excellent. Just curious, tell me about another time when you remained persistent even though everyone else around you gave up.
You want business or personal or either or what?
Business is fine.
Business is fine. Let me think about that.
Sure.
Can we come back to that one?
Absolutely.
I can't think of an example right off the top of my head.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to circle back later on in the interview. Again, we've got plenty of time. We'll be taking as much time as we need to circle back and make sure we've answered, or you've gotten a chance to answer all the questions as thoroughly as you'd like. All right, thank you. A couple of things there. I thought you answered the question fairly well. You talked about, again, making a series of touches with this person over time. What I wanted to do, and what the most important thing is to do in these situations, is to get specific. So to dig for specifics. So I want to find out exactly how many touches you made. I wanted to give you the opportunity to answer that question. I wanted you to tell me exactly how many times you had circled back to that individual. I wanted to know, again, in terms of your record keeping, what you had done to be effective at that. And I wanted to make sure that, again, we had the opportunity, ideally, to speak with your supervisor, your manager, again, in the reference check element, just to verify that that had, in fact, taken place. So, again, the key is to continue to get specifics and continue to drill down. Oftentimes, when you ask a broad question like that, tell me about, the time when, or the last time when you remained persistent even though everyone else around you gave up, the person will give you a lot of platitudes at the beginning. They'll say, "Oh, that happens all the time. I'm always persistent." Or should I give an example about work, or should I give a personal example? Always keep it to the world of work and continue to dig down and get specifics. I want to understand exactly what had happened in that specific situation. If, for example, you're having questions about the person's reaction, or how the person responded in a given event. So maybe you're wondering about, the candidate maybe tells you a story about picking up the phone and being involved in a particularly difficult call with a manager, and maybe reacting in a way that they were maybe a little bit embarrassed about, or wish they hadn't reacted in that way. One of the things that I like to say is, okay, if I were a fly on the wall and I were watching you in that moment, what would I see? What would it look like? And oftentimes at that time, the person will give you a little bit more detail. Oh, I guess if you saw me, I guess I kind of turned red. I started shouting a little bit on the phone, and then I, when the call ended up going well, I started yelling, things like that. Getting that picture of that person, getting that snapshot of that person in the moment, is what gives you, again, a better predictor of how the person is going to behave. What you want to do then is establish a pattern. So you start to see, okay, maybe this is a person who's a little bit of a hothead, the sort of person who's reacting maybe a little strongly under these sorts of high-pressure situations. I continue to ask a series of questions. I continue to question the person again to establish the pattern. One of the things I like to do with this question, too, is to ask it again. Tell me about another time when you stayed persistent, even though everyone else around you gave up. And again, the person who has that high degree of optimism, they have several examples. People will often remark, well, these questions are difficult. And again, that's the point. People who don't have that high degree of success, that high degree of drive, will oftentimes have difficulty answering these questions. The person, on the other hand, who comes in with that strong need for achievement, strong competitiveness, strong optimism, they love these questions. These questions give them the opportunity to shine. So you ask them, they've got their brag book with them, they've got everything written up. It looks beautiful, the sort of individual that when you continue to probe the questions, each one of them, it's sort of like you're putting them up to the plate and they're knocking it out of the park every single time. And what you see in an individual like that is, okay, this is an individual that is strong in these characteristics. They've got the wherewithal to bring these talents to bear when they come to work with you. Of course, interview's the final stage. The first stage is about the testing process. So we want to make sure that we're testing folks, and the folks that we do see after we do test them and screen them, we end up interviewing a much richer texture of candidate. I just talked for a long time. I'm sorry.
That's wonderful. No, that's good. You think people are generally lying?
Are they generally lying?
A lot of these questions seem to believe, you have to dig down deep because you don't think they're telling the truth. Is that a fair assessment or not?
I think in the interview process, everyone's putting their best foot forward. Whether that person is interviewing for a job as an accountant, whether they're interviewing for a job as a chef or a salesperson, everybody's putting their best foot forward. In the realm of sales, now we're dealing with the next level. We're dealing with folks who oftentimes know what it is that we as an interviewer want to hear. And so they're going to be especially good at, again, conveying that image. So our job becomes a little bit more difficult. We have to make sure that we're especially good at digging beneath the surface and continuing to probe. And again, the examples that we're using fairly shallow because we have to get through enough examples in the allotted time. But when you're sitting down with someone one-on-one, you can really take the time to dig down deep. And that's when you do that, when you start to ask those follow-up questions, that if you do have an individual that's coming in trying to fake the interview or is coming in with their prepared, canned answers, when you start digging in deep, that's when you start catching them. I remember having someone once where at one point they just weren't able to come up with enough detail, and they could tell that they weren't doing well in the interview. And at one point they said, look, can you just give somebody a chance? Maybe just take a chance on me in a sales position. And I didn't laugh, but I was thinking, well, I'm glad that we're at least having the opportunity to uncover the details of your previous experiences, or as much detail as you're willing to provide about what you say are your previous experiences. Because again, this helps us. It's really, again, sales, like I mentioned, is a special type of gut check. And there are a lot of folks who think they want a job in sales, but they don't know what it's going to take. They don't know what type of passion and dedication they're going to need to show. So it's all about, again, making sure the job is right, or the match is right for the company and for the salesperson. It's that twofold match, and that's our job in the interview and recruiting process.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let me just recap some of these techniques for the audience at home. Make sure you redirect the interviewee. Get them on track if they're getting off track. Use the echo technique that Chris used on me. Repeat that last couple of words in their sentence to get them to give you more information. Dig down deep, or the one down approach that you called it. Ask for more specifics. You also revealed the magic wand technique. If you were to wave a magic wand in this particular situation, what would that scenario look like? Always use the world of work when you're trying to dig down deep and figure out if they're competitive or optimistic or have a high need for achievement. And then also use the fly on the wall technique, so you can picture yourself in their scenario, in their cube. If I was a fly on the wall, what would I see you doing at this particular point? How's that for a summary, Chris?
Very good, sir.
All right, good.
Impressive.
Well, good. Taking diligent notes here. A lot of good techniques for home here. So that's all we have this week. Thanks, Dr. Chris Croner, for joining this week on This Week in Sales.
My pleasure as always. Thank you again, Kevin.
Great. So if you have any questions for us, please email me at askkevin@thisweekin.com. Of course, you can like our Facebook fan page at This Week in Sales. Tweet at us at Sales Week. And of course, you can download our iTunes podcast. Go to iTunes. And then you can also find a recording of the show on YouTube, youtube.com/show/This Week in Sales. Stay tuned for next week's episode of This Week in Sales. Thanks for joining us.